We're looking at Edge magazine number 14, released late 1994 to be exact, November, and discussing the future of interactive entertainment, because that's what Edge does. And do you recognize the game on the cover? I didn't. It's apparently Heart of Darkness. Do you remember that game? I did, but I remember the hype surrounding around it at the time. Especially a friend of mine was excited about it. We'll talk more about the game once we get inside, but is it just me, or is this a horribly ugly cover? Maybe it's because of the way the lettering is done. I don't know. But luckily the inside isn't that ugly. So Edge goes to France to check out those making this game, Heart of Darkness, but also other companies making Little Big Adventure and Alone in the Dark 3. So, and of course Lost Eden, which we saw a couple issues ago on the cover. So the opening column talks about how the 32-bit giants would be smashing the 16-bit consoles. Little did they know at the time that 1995 would be a very good year for the Super Nintendo, with Yoshi's Island, Killer Instinct, Mortal Kombat 3. God, I can't come up with the names. Of course, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI. Oh, it's late 1994. Earthbound, and there was one other game I can't see. Oh, Donkey Kong Country 2. So 1995 was a very good year for the 16-bit console, the Super Nintendo. I don't know about the Genesis though. Saturn was focusing on Sega was focusing on the Saturn, of course. So here are the contents, and I don't know what this picture is about. Maybe we'll find out later. It looks very Parisian, so I think they're going to Paris. Yeah, that's a Paris subway, right? Yeah. Alright, so the ECTS, the European version of the E3, shows more of the same. Although there is a 32-bit, 32X version of Virtua Fighter on display, which looks better than expected, and Doom, which didn't play that well. It's not a bad conversion considering the hardware. The music's horrible though. The Jaguar version was better, but I don't think it was released yet. We have David Perry, who we often see in Edge. 3DO is still trying to make some noise. Sony does something interesting. They have their own stand in another building, which always annoys me when they do that. So showing off their stuff 5 minutes further down the street. The Neo Geo starts to get sold. Excuse me, I have my finger on the way. The Neo Geo's being sold in Japan with the CD-ROM and new controllers. Don't know if they're as good as the originals. I've tried this one, but I've never tried this one. So yeah, of course, made because the cartridges for the Neo Geo were expensive. They're extremely expensive these days. I've recently read an article in the New Yorker about prices going around for $10,000 or something, because simply for being rare, I guess, and bootlegs being a problem. With the games being so expensive on cartridge in the 90s, we're talking about $200. They decided to release CD versions, which would be about $50. Okay, new date set for the Sony launch. If I remember correctly, it was late 1994 for Japan and mid-1995 for the rest of the world. And here we see some images of Battle Arena Toshiden, which looked pretty cool. At the time it was called Tale of the Gods of Combat. And I didn't play that fantastically though, but that was the case for all the 3D fighting games at the time. Saturn counting on its big guns, because it wouldn't get quite the third-party support that Sony would get. So we have Virtua Fighter, Shinobi, Clockwork Knight, Daytona USA, Basic Dragoon, and I don't know this game. Apparently it's called Gale Racer. So still more talk about the M2, which would never come into existence, but yeah, using PowerPC technology. This is interesting. I think this made a big deal in the long run. So Bally Midway, because of Cruising USA, had a deal with Nintendo. And yes, Cruising USA would only be released for the Ultra 64. But for a while, it looked like Mortal Kombat 3 and other Midway games would only be released for Nintendo consoles. But that changed. Because the Nintendo 64 took a while to be released, Williams or Midway, I get those two confused a bit. They wanted to have Mortal Kombat 3 on the PlayStation. Now, why is this important? The Saturn did not have Mortal Kombat 3 at the start, and at the time that was a deal. That was a thing actually with most consumers. And the Saturn didn't have Mortal Kombat 3. It instead got a contract to have Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. So in that sense, Sega fans were happy with that, but still they would have rather had Mortal Kombat 3 at release, because Mortal Kombat was losing interest. To be honest, 3 wasn't as good as 2, at least when it came to improvements. And Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, well, they didn't get that much attention. And Mortal Kombat 4, hardly any either. So the PlayStation eventually did get Mortal Kombat Trilogy, just like Nintendo 64, but by then Mortal Kombat was not that cool anymore. Here you see an expo for the internet. I don't know, they talked about something interesting here, but I forgot it already. Oh yeah, Mosaic. They're talking about the different web browsers at the time. All the web browsers nowadays are more or less the same, but at the time there were new companies trying to come up with new things. So the Earth World Show. This is a show dedicated to the Super Famicom, and like I said, 1995 was a good year. We see here Dragon Quest. Well, it's not Part 6, but it's an earlier one. Chrono Trigger, Earthbound. So the Japanese still making good games for the Super Nintendo. If you go to the Future Entertainment Show, which would be the British version of the E3, you could play the 32X and Killer Instinct. Now, some news, but nothing interesting. We see David Perry again choking one of the Edge editors. You rarely see one of the writers of Edge in the magazine. So if you happen to recognize this fellow, can I get a sharp image, please? What's his name? Ed. If you see Ed once, say thank you for making such a fantastic magazine in the 90s. Okay, the letters. One person complaining that Edge is negative about the Jaguar. No, they're just negative about horrible games like Kasumi Ninja, which is a blatant Mortal Kombat ripoff. Now, this was a pretty cool letter, because 1 or 2 months ago, there was a programmer bashing C or other high-level languages and sticking to assembly code. And here we have a letter saying, no, assembly code is good because you make less mistakes, and the difference in speed isn't worth it. So, yeah, this I believe went on for quite a while. The discussion between using assembly code, which is the code of the machine itself, or using a compiler like C or Java or any modern language, I don't know, like Perl, and yeah, but even in the mid-90s, people were still going, yeah, you need to stick to assembly. And I love the purist attitude. I think it's very romantic, but you have to, games are getting too big to do things in assembly. So we have to stay realistic. Okay, so I like this commercial. Apparently, Reservoir Dogs is so popular that they use it for a commercial for ASCII pads, and a friend of mine had this one for the Super Nintendo. It was just as good as the normal one, but you had turbo functions, but you never used that. I've always wondered how good this stick felt. It looks kind of odd because of the weird button layout. But these are called fighting sticks. Ooh. I don't think they were as good as Hori sticks. Okay. Some previews. Ridge Racer. Running at 30 frames per second instead of 60 frames per second. But other than that, very close to the arcade original. Good conversion. Magic Carpet. That was an odd game. Very weird atmosphere. It was very unclear what you exactly had to do, but it looked fantastic with these 3D graphics. And yeah, you rode around shooting things on a flying carpet. And the coolest part was multiplayer, but I don't think many people did that at the time. Made by Peter Molyneux. And the funny thing is these buildings come out of nowhere. I've never understood the game well. Had very heavy fog. You couldn't see far in the distance. Kind of like Turok on the Nintendo 64. Quite a popular title at the time, though. So, Burn Cycle, maybe the best game for the CDI. Very CDI-ish in its gameplay. Mostly stills, which were pre-rendered. And what you mostly did in the game was just talk with people. But sometimes you had to shoot things. And sometimes you had to figure a puzzle out. The reason to play it is, of course, the awesome atmosphere. Actually, it's a lot of fun playing because, or at least looking at it, because on YouTube maybe, because it's very cyberpunk, very 1993. There's this one character who's addicted to the internet, for example, and so yeah, if you want to see how people thought about the future before the future was here, look at Burn Cycle. Now, Gex was probably the best platforming game for the 3DO, and might have been the mascot for the 3DO, because that's how people still thought about the gaming industry at the time. Looked very pretty. It didn't play as well as Donkey Kong Country, though. But a handsome game. And Gex would go on to other games, which would become less popular. He always had that snarky attitude, though. Striker 3DO. I don't know about this game. It's a soccer game for the 3DO, and I think that's all I can say about it. Clockwork Knight, another fancy-looking platforming game, but this one time for the Saturn, and it got good reviews for its presentation, although I think it was a bit, the 3D parts are a bit overdone, kind of like Nights into Dreams. I always find it a bit annoying that they stuck so much 3D stuff into a 2D, obviously 2D game, and but there wasn't that much interesting to do in this game. It was just run and jump. And a lot of critics said things like, yeah, this is the same old platform game we've been doing for 10 years. It's gameplay-wise not an improvement on the original Super Mario Brothers. So, Panzer Dragoon, again, not better than Star Fox in gameplay, but it looked so fantastic. I mean, these dragons moved so beautifully. And, yeah, the 3D graphics were a sight to behold. It's an on-rail shooter, and there were a lot of on-rail shooters at the time using fancy graphics, but this one sticks out because it's really beautiful to look at. And it plays a bit better, too. Tama was I don't know if this was released in the West, but it's a maze game. All you do is you turn the maze around, kind of like one of those boxes you might have come across in life, and you try to get your ball to the end of the level. I don't know if you can even die in this game. I never got that far. So, yeah, it's more like a demo showing the showing the graphic capabilities of the Saturn and the physics mostly. I mean, you can tell there's gravity in this game, so that's pretty cool. And there's Virtua Fighter, a new version. Now it's 40% done. People so hyped for Virtua Fighter at the time. Okay, that's it for now. We'll see you at part 2.